I'm Mary Van Pelt, and I'm honored to have this opportunity to speak. I met E.P. McKnight when she gave her performance, I Question America, about the life of Fannie Lou Hamer at Adams State College on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. So I was very touched by that. I've always been touched by civil rights issues and have followed them for a long time, but after my experience of job discrimination, I got even more intensely interested in the civil rights movement. In August of 1983, I had an experience that changed my life. I had a psychotic episode, and I was transported in the middle of the night. I was handcuffed, and I was taken in a sheriff's car from my home in Alamosa to the state hospital in Pueblo. It's 120 miles away. And that experience changed my life. I was held for a week on my back in 4-point restraint, and I received 4 psychotropic medications. Some people aren't familiar with the term psychiatric survivor, and it probably means different things to different people. But generally, people who have had the experience of being a mental patient and being locked inside a mental institution, those are the people that tend to identify themselves as a psychiatric survivor. Some people go into the private sector. They've had experiences with mental illness but are able to get help in the private sector, and they don't always identify with other mental patients. And in fact, for many years, I was proud of my ability to hide my psychiatric disability. Nobody knew I had a mental illness, and I kept my diagnosis hidden for decades until I had an experience of job discrimination based on my diagnosis, and that changed everything. And it was out of that experience that I began speaking publicly about the discrimination with employment. It's difficult for people that have been diagnosed with a mental illness to get help through the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's not quite the same as, it's not as visible. It is a civil rights issue. Usually the things they need are not very expensive things. They might just need privacy. They might just need understanding that, you know what, when things get crazy for me, I just need to go away and be quiet for a while and then be able to return to work. A traditional 8-to-5 job setting can be real difficult for a person diagnosed with a psychiatric disability, and in fact self-employment is often the way that people choose to go. It makes more sense, and they can have flexible hours to deal with when they're having a good day or having a bad day. Because these illnesses are invisible and other employees will feel that they're being discriminated against, you know, Jane gets to have flexible hours but I don't, and Jane's illness is certainly not visible. So what kind of changes need to happen? From my experience, it has to do with sharing the power and being able, and again I'm talking about within a community mental health center, but I think this could grow out into the bigger world. It's sharing the power instead of somebody having power over someone. Systems have power over people. It took me a long time to figure that out too. That wasn't an easy answer. But it was Dr. Susan Manning. I co-authored a book chapter with her. In fact, it's on my website, maryvanpelt.com. It's real easy to suffer in silence and to not speak about these issues because speaking about them brings stigma and discrimination, or it can bring that. Ultimately, the goal is to break out of that, to break through that. I was employed at a community mental health center as a case manager for more than 10 years. Because I live in a rural community, there is only one community mental health center. So the place where I was receiving services was also the place where I was employed. It couldn't be any other way in my situation. There was no other place for me to receive services. When I was employed at the community mental health center, my therapist in the office memo that's circulated, put a note to say that he was holding a Thanksgiving Day potluck at his home, and you could RSVP to attend. So I put a note in his box and I said I'd like to RSVP and I'd like to attend. And at the time I put the note in his box, it went round and round in my head. Am I a client? And because I'm a client, I'm not eligible to attend this event, or am I a staff member? Well, I received the invitation as a staff member, so I decided I'd take a positive note that I was a staff member, that I was invited, put a little note in his box, said I'd like to RSVP and I'd bring an apple pie. And he put a note in my box saying that I wasn't invited. That wasn't appropriate. After all, what would people think? That's an example of a dual relationship, and they're numerous. But we start looking at all these dual relationships about what people can and can't do, and sometimes we make rules that are so complicated, trying to legislate how things should go, that the rules are no longer fit or no longer appropriate for certain people. And it's not about mental illness, it's more about where people are at in their recovery and how well they're able to live their lives, relate to other people, and deal with the challenges that life presents to everyone. So I arranged to take a one-year leave of absence from my employment. And after I'd been gone a year, I began negotiating the terms of returning to work. Around that period of time, a supervisor came to me and said that we were all the same, that people diagnosed with a mental illness were all the same, and if I wanted to work at the agency, I needed to be in a job called supported employment. And supported employment is basically basic job training skills. And I already had a college education, and I already had more than 20 years of experience in the field of human services. Because of my diagnosis, a supervisor at the Community Mental Health Center told me that was the program where I belonged. There were no other options. So I returned to the agency, and I spent 6 months as an employee within the supported employment program, and really experienced the difference between night and day, the difference between having been a staff member and treated as a staff member and treated as if I didn't have an illness, to being treated as if I belonged in this box with people who are disabled. And that is where I really get the power of my need to speak out for change and for social justice, that we're not all the same. And also, you know, advocacy work certainly isn't for everyone. It's right for me, and it's what I choose to do. But many people who have recovered from a mental illness choose not to speak about their illness. They go on to become professionals, doctors, lawyers. Some people get out of the mental institution and they don't want to help others, and they shouldn't. But there's a certain group that does want to help. And I wouldn't be able to stand here today and tell you my story if I hadn't been on a very long journey of recovery since I had that experience. And it was that experience that began to open doors for me. I began to attend meetings and meet other people who had had experiences very similar to my own. Problems with psychotropic medications, problems with therapy. The experiences we shared when we talked to each other were just very profound, and very profound for me, because for 6 years I'd never linked with anybody else that had been locked up. And in fact, the people that have been through the system are in a very powerful and helpful place to learn those, to help others that are just learning how to deal with the system, need answers about medications, need someone to show them the way. So what we have to offer each other is that we open doors for each other just by listening, by having a shared experience, and then a whole world opened to me of understanding what I had been through and making sense of it. And that's what I've received from knowing other psychiatric survivors, and that's what I have to offer others. I'd like to thank E.P. McKnight for allowing me to speak. It was a pleasure meeting you, and thank you.